I still remember the exact moment I realized what she was. It was a Tuesday night just past midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to get some water. And that's when I heard her voice coming from the living room, low, almost a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the silence of that house. She was on the phone with someone, I don't know who, I never found out. But what she said, I will never forget it as long as I live. She said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything obvious. That's not how you destroy someone. You do it slowly. You take everything from them piece by piece, their confidence, their marriage, their happiness, until there's nothing left. And by the time anyone notices, it'll already be too late." And then she laughed. I stood there in the dark hallway, barefoot on that cold floor, completely frozen. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. Because the woman on that phone, the woman casually talking about destroying someone's life like it was nothing, was my mother-in-law. And the person she was talking about destroying was me. My name is Emily Russell. And 2 years ago, I was the happiest I had ever been in my life. I had just married the man I loved more than anything. James was kind and patient and the kind of person who remembered the small things, the way I liked my coffee, the songs that made me cry, the exact moment I needed a hug without me saying a word. I thought marrying him meant I had won at life. I thought I was walking into a new chapter that was only going to get better. The day I moved into that house, his mother Linda held my face in both her hands, looked me in the eyes, and told me I was the daughter she always wanted. She had the warmest smile I had ever seen on a woman her age, and I believed her. I genuinely believed her, because why wouldn't I? She was my husband's mother. She was supposed to be my family now. I had no idea that the woman holding my face that day had already decided she wanted me gone. And if you're new here, please subscribe and stay with me, because this story gets so much darker before it gets better. And I promise you, you do not want to miss what happens at the end. It started with small things. The kind of things that are so small, so ordinary that you almost feel crazy for noticing them. The first week I moved in, I made dinner for the three of us, a pasta dish I had made 100 times before, something I was genuinely proud of. James loved it. He told me twice. But Linda sat at that table, pushed the food around her plate, and said very quietly, "It's interesting. We just usually cook things a little differently in this house." She smiled when she said it, like she was being helpful. I told myself it was nothing. She was just used to her own cooking. It was fine. But then it was my clothes. She never said anything directly. Linda was far too smart for that. She would just look at what I was wearing when family came over and then look away and then sigh. Just a small sigh. Just enough for me to notice. Just enough to make me second-guess myself before I even walked into the room. And then it was my family. We were at a dinner with some of her friends one evening, and somehow the conversation turned to where I grew up, and Linda said with that same warm smile, "Oh, Emily came from very modest beginnings. We think it's wonderful that she's adapted so well." The table laughed politely. James smiled. And I sat there with a fork in my hand, feeling like I had just been slapped in a room full of people and no one had seen it. I didn't say anything. I told myself she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself things would get better once she got to know me. I was so wrong. The thing about Linda was that she never came at me directly, not once, not in those early months. She was far too careful for that, far too calculated. What she did instead was so much more dangerous. She went after my marriage from the inside. It began with little whispers. Things she would say to James when I wasn't in the room, or at least when she thought I wasn't in the room. I would come downstairs and the conversation would stop just a half second too late. James would look at me a little differently than he had that morning, not angry exactly, just distant, like something had shifted behind his eyes that I couldn't quite reach. At first I thought I was imagining it. James and I had always been so connected, so open with each other. He told me everything, or at least I thought he did. But somewhere around the 3rd month of living in that house, I started noticing that he was coming to bed later. That he was quieter at dinner. That when I tried to talk to him about something that bothered me, even something small, even something completely unrelated to his mother, he would listen with this expression on his face that I had never seen before. Like he was already skeptical before I even finished my sentence. One evening I was in the kitchen and I heard Linda talking to him in the living room. She didn't know I was still home. I had come back early from a grocery run because I forgot my wallet. and I stood very still near the kitchen doorway and I listened. She was telling him that she was worried about me, that I had spoken to her in a tone that morning that made her feel unwelcome in her own home, that she didn't want to cause any problems, that she would never want to come between us, but she just felt like I didn't respect her. Her voice was so soft, so genuinely hurt-sounding. If I hadn't been there that morning, if I didn't know with absolute certainty that I had said nothing even remotely unkind to her, I might have believed her myself. James said, "Mom, I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it." And Linda said, "I know, sweetheart, I know she's still adjusting. I just want us all to be happy." I walked back out the front door as quietly as I had come in. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. And for the first time since I had moved into that house, I felt genuinely afraid. Not of Linda exactly, not yet, but of how good she was at this. Of how easily James had accepted what she said without even questioning it. Of how invisible I was becoming inside my own marriage and I hadn't even realized it was happening. That night at dinner, James was quieter than usual. I asked him if everything was okay. He said yes. But he didn't look at me the way he used to. And that small shift, that tiny degree of coldness that hadn't been there before, felt like a door closing somewhere deep inside our relationship. A door I didn't even know existed until I heard it shut. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. Linda became more confident in her lies because they were working. She told James I had been dismissive of his mother's cooking in front of her friends. She told him I had complained about his long work hours to her, which made him feel like I was going behind his back. She told him once very casually that she sometimes felt like I saw their home as temporary, like I was always looking for a way out. None of it was true, not a single word. But by the time she was done, James had begun to look at me with a question in his eyes that was never there before. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake at night, was that I still couldn't prove any of it. Every lie Linda told him was wrapped in so much love and concern that by the time it reached James, it didn't look like a lie at all. It looked like a worried mother trying to hold her family together. And I was the problem she was trying to protect him from. If the first 2 months were about making me doubt myself, and the second 2 months were about making James doubt me, then what came next was about making everyone doubt me. Linda was ready to take it public. It was a Sunday afternoon in early November. Linda had organized a family lunch, her sister's husband, 2 cousins James hadn't seen in years, and a couple that had been friends of the family for decades. I spent the entire morning helping prepare. I set the table, I helped with the food, I made sure everything looked beautiful because I genuinely wanted to make a good impression. I wanted these people to like me. I wanted to feel like I belonged in this family. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. People were warm, the food was good, the conversation was easy. I started to relax. I remember thinking that maybe things were turning a corner. Maybe I had been overthinking everything. And then Linda said it. We were talking about where James and I had met, and someone asked about my family, where I grew up, what my parents did. And before I could even answer, Linda jumped in with that smile, that perfectly rehearsed, completely convincing smile, and said, "Oh, Emily's family went through some very difficult times financially. We don't talk about it much because she finds it painful, but we've always admired how far she's come. It takes a certain kind of person to marry into a family like ours and just figure it out as they go." The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. Just 1 second, and then someone laughed politely and changed the subject. But in that 1 second, every single person at that table had heard what Linda said and understood exactly what she meant. That I was beneath them. That I had married James for security. That I was someone who needed to be managed and tolerated, not welcomed and loved. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at James. He was looking down at his plate. He didn't say a word. I excused myself to use the bathroom and I locked the door and I stood over that sink, gripping the edges of it so hard my knuckles went white. I looked at myself in that mirror and I made myself a promise. I was not going to cry, not here, not in her house, not where she could hear me and feel like she had won. I walked back to that table, sat down, smiled, and finished the rest of that lunch like nothing had happened. I made conversation, I laughed at the right moments. I was so composed that even Linda looked slightly confused when she glanced at me from across the table. But inside, something had changed, something quiet and permanent. Because I understood something in that bathroom that I hadn't fully understood before. This was not going to stop on its own. Linda was not going to get tired of this or feel guilty and pull back. She was going to keep going until she had taken everything from me, my reputation, my marriage, my sense of self. The only question was what I was going to do about it. 6 months into living in that house, I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor with that test in my hands and I cried, but not from sadness, from relief. From this overwhelming feeling that something beautiful was finally happening in the middle of all this darkness. I thought about James's face when I told him. I thought about how this tiny new life might somehow be the thing that brought us back together, that reminded him of what we had built and what we were supposed to be to each other. I told him that evening, just the two of us in our bedroom with the door closed. And for the first time in months, I saw him, the real him, the one I had married, come back into his eyes. He held me for a long time without saying anything. Then he pulled back and looked at my face, and he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in so long it almost broke my heart. We agreed to keep it quiet for a few weeks, just between us, but Linda found out within 4 days. I don't know how. I never figured out exactly what gave it away. Maybe she noticed I wasn't drinking wine at dinner, maybe she heard us talking through the wall, maybe she had eyes in that house I didn't know about. But she knew, and when she came to me 2 mornings later in the kitchen with that soft look on her face and said, "I heard the news, I'm so happy for you both," something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. After that she became almost too attentive. She insisted on cooking for me. She brought me herbal teas she said were good for early pregnancy. She hovered. She was warm in a way she hadn't been since the very first day I walked into that house, and it made me more uncomfortable than any of her cruelty ever had. Because I knew Linda well enough by then to know that when she was being kind, she wanted something, or she was planning something. 3 weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night with pain that I cannot describe to you. The kind of pain that tells your body before your mind can process it that something is deeply, terribly wrong. I lost the baby that night. I was in the hospital for 2 days. James barely left my side. And Linda came every single day, flowers, food, a gentle hand on my arm, tears in her eyes that looked so real I almost reached for her. Almost. But I was lying in that hospital bed with so much grief and so much exhaustion, and underneath all of it, this quiet, cold, terrible question that I could not shake no matter how hard I tried. Those teas she had been giving me, the ones she said were good for pregnancy, I had looked some of them up on my phone late one night after she brought them. Most were fine. But one of them, one that she had given me 3 times in the week before I lost the bab, I had read something about it that made me feel sick. Something about how in high doses it could be dangerous during the first trimester. Something I had told myself I was probably overreacting about because surely she wouldn't. Surely no one would do that. I didn't say anything to James. I had no proof. I had an empty tin of tea and a terrible suspicion and a grief so heavy I could barely breathe under it. And Linda sat beside my hospital bed and held my hand and cried, and I let her, because what else could I do? But I did not forget. I did not let myself forget a single detail. And when I got home from that hospital, something inside me that had still been holding on to hope, that small, stubborn piece of me that kept saying maybe I was wrong about her, maybe she wasn't really this person, that piece finally went quiet. I knew exactly who she was now, and I knew that if I was going to survive this, I was going to have to be smarter than her. 4 months after the miscarriage, Linda tried to kill me. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like something from a movie, something too extreme to be real. I thought the same thing, right up until the moment it happened, and I was sitting on the side of the road shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. It was a Wednesday morning. I was driving to meet a friend for coffee, one of the few friends I still had regular contact with, because Linda had slowly and very deliberately made herself a source of conflict in almost every friendship I tried to maintain. I had my coffee in the cup holder, the radio on low, and I was thinking about nothing in particular. Just glad to be out of that house for a few hours. I got onto the highway and I pushed my speed up to merge with traffic, and that's when I felt it. The car pulled hard, violently hard to the left. I gripped the wheel and it fought me. I hit the brakes and the car fishtailed, and by some combination of instinct and pure luck I managed to get it onto the shoulder without hitting anyone. I sat there with my hazard lights on and my heart slamming against my ribs and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When the tow truck driver looked at the car, he came to the window with a look on his face that I will never forget. He said, "Ma'am, were you aware that 2 of your lug nuts on the front left wheel were almost completely off?" He said it the way you say something when you're trying to be calm but you're not actually calm. He said if I had been going any faster or if I had waited another mile, the wheel would have come off completely. He asked me when I had last had the car serviced. I told him 3 months ago everything was fine, everything was checked. He nodded slowly and didn't say anything else. I called James. He came. He was shaken, he was relieved. He held me in the parking lot of the gas station where we waited, and I could feel how scared he was. He said we needed to get the car fully inspected, said we needed to be more careful about maintenance. He didn't ask any other questions. It didn't occur to him to ask any other questions. But here is what James did not know. 2 days before that, I had gone out to the grocery store and come back to find Linda in the garage. She said she had been looking for a box she had stored there years ago. She seemed completely unbothered. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought about it a lot after that Wednesday on the highway. I still had no proof. I had a suspicion and a near accident and a memory of a woman standing in my garage 2 days earlier. That was all. And I knew I had learned by now that going to James with suspicion and no proof would only make me look unstable. Linda had been building that narrative for months. If I went to him now and said, "I think your mother tampered with my car," he would look at me with that expression I had come to dread, and he would say something gentle and reasonable, and it would be over. So I didn't say a word. But that night, after James fell asleep, I lay there in the dark and I made a decision. I was done waiting for things to get better on their own. I was done hoping that James would see what was right in front of him. I was done being the patient, silent, reasonable one while this woman systematically took my life apart piece by piece. I was going to start collecting everything. Every lie, every incident, every moment I could document. And I was going to wait for exactly the right moment. And when that moment came, I wasn't going to leave a single thing to chance. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why didn't you just tell him? Why didn't you sit James down and say, "Your mother is doing this, your mother said this, your mother was in the garage, your mother gave me those teas"? Why did you keep protecting a man who was not protecting you? And I understand that question. I asked myself the same thing almost every single day. But here is what I need you to understand about the situation I was in. James loved his mother in a way that had no logic to it, no objectivity. She had raised him alone after his father left when James was 7 years old. She had worked 2 jobs to put him through college. She had sacrificed things for him that he felt he could never fully repay. That history, that deep, complicated, guilt-laden love was the armor Linda wore every single day. And she knew it. She used it deliberately and expertly. Every time I had come close to saying something in those early months, I had watched how James responded when his mother even seemed slightly upset. He didn't get defensive, he got protective in a way that was almost primal. Like a switch flipped. And I had learned, slowly and painfully, that if I put him in a position where he had to choose between me and his mother, I was not going to win. Not yet. Not without something real and undeniable in my hands. So I waited, I kept my face calm and my voice steady, and I waited. I started small. I bought a journal, a plain one, nothing that would attract attention, and I began writing everything down. Dates, times, exactly what was said, who was present, what happened immediately before and after. Every incident, no matter how small. I started keeping my phone close. I learned how to use the voice memo function without looking like I was using it. I recorded 3 conversations over the course of 6 weeks, moments where Linda said things when she thought we were alone, moments where her mask slipped just enough to show what was underneath. I started photographing things. The teas she gave me, I had kept 1 tin tucked away at the back of a cabinet. I photographed the label. I researched every ingredient. I wrote down what I found. I reached out to the mechanic who had inspected my car after the highway incident. I asked for a written report. He gave me one, and what it said was vague. Evidence of possible interference was the closest it came to anything definitive, but I kept it. I kept everything, and through all of it I kept my face completely neutral. I had dinner with Linda every night. I asked her about her day. I complimented her cooking. I was so pleasant, so consistent, so entirely unlike a woman who was quietly building a case against her, that I think she started to relax. I think she started to believe she had already won. That was exactly what I needed her to believe. It happened on a Thursday evening in March, almost 14 months after I had moved into that house. Linda told James I was having an affair. She didn't come to me first. She didn't confront me or give me a chance to respond. She went directly to James, told him she had seen messages on my phone while I had left it on the kitchen counter, told him she hadn't meant to look but the screen had lit up and she couldn't help but see. She gave him a name, a man I had worked with 2 years earlier, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. She said the messages were intimate. She said she was devastated to have to tell him, but she felt she had no choice. None of it was true. There were no messages. There was no affair, but James didn't come to me and ask. He didn't sit me down and say, "My mother told me this, can you explain?" He came home that evening with his jaw set and his eyes cold in a way I had never seen before, and he told me he wanted me to leave. I looked at him for a long moment, and I thought about all the things I could say, all the things I had been holding back for 14 months, and I made a choice. I said, "Okay, just that, just one word." I went upstairs. I packed one bag, just enough for a few nights. I took my journal. I took my phone with the recordings on it. I took the mechanic's report and the photograph of the tea tin and every piece of paper I had quietly collected over more than a year of living in that house. I put it all in the bottom of my bag under my clothes, and then I walked out of that house without looking back. Linda was standing in the hallway as I left. She had this expression on her face just for a second, just long enough for me to see it before she rearranged it into something that looked like sorrow. But I saw it. I saw what was underneath. She thought it was over. She thought she had finally won. She had no idea she had just given me exactly what I needed. I stayed with my friend Ashley for 3 weeks. And during those 3 weeks, while James went silent and Linda presumably celebrated, I did 3 things. First, I organized everything I had collected into a clear, chronological record. Every date, every incident, every recording, every document. I put it together the way you would put together a case, because that is exactly what it was. Second, I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Christine, and she was exactly the kind of woman you want in your corner when your life is falling apart, calm, precise, and completely unsentimental about what needed to happen next. She listened to everything I told her. She reviewed what I had. She told me it was more than she expected and that I had been smart to document as carefully as I had. Third, I waited. I didn't contact James. I didn't respond to the 2 brief messages he sent that were polite and distant and said nothing of substance. I let the silence sit, because I had learned after 14 months in that house that silence is sometimes the loudest thing you can say. The turn came 17 days after I left, and it came from the most unexpected place. Linda had a sister, a woman named Donna, who I had met twice and who I knew Linda had a complicated relationship with. They were close in the way that people who know too much about each other are always close, bound together by history and secrets and old grievances that never fully healed. Donna called James on a Tuesday afternoon. I found out later that she had been holding something for years, something she had seen and heard and stayed quiet about because it was easier that way. Because Linda was her sister and family meant silence. But something about what had happened, maybe she had heard from someone how it ended, maybe her conscience finally became too loud to ignore, made her pick up the phone. She told James everything she knew. Not just about me, about his whole life. About the woman before me who Linda had also systematically driven away. About the friend of James's in college who had seen too much and suddenly found himself unwelcome. About patterns Donna had watched repeat themselves for 30 years and had told herself weren't her business. And then James found the recordings. He found them because he called me finally after 17 days, and I answered. And I told him calmly and clearly that before he said anything, there were some things he needed to hear. I sent him the recordings. I told him to listen to all of them and then call me back. He called me back 2 hours later. He didn't say anything for a long moment after I picked up. And then his voice broke and he said, "Emily, what did I do?" I think the hardest part of all of this, harder than the miscarriage, harder than the night I nearly lost control of my car on the highway, harder than packing that bag and walking out of that house, was watching James fall apart when he finally understood. Because I had loved this man. I still loved this man. And there is nothing easy about watching someone you love realize that they have failed you completely, that they were used as a weapon against you by someone they trusted more than anyone in the world. He came to Ashley's apartment 2 days after that phone call. He sat at her kitchen table and he went through everything I had: the journal, the recordings, the mechanic's report, the photograph of the tea tin, and what I had researched about it. He read everything slowly and carefully. He didn't say much while he was reading. He just went very still. When he was finished, he looked up at me and his eyes were red and he said, "She gave you those teas when you were pregnant?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And then you lost the baby?" I said, "Yes." He didn't say anything for a long time after that. And I didn't try to fill the silence because there was nothing to fill it with. Some things just need to sit in the air and be what they are. He apologized to me that night. For a long time and in a lot of different ways. He apologized for every moment he had chosen his mother's word over mine. For every time he had looked at me with that new coldness in his eyes that she had put there. For asking me to leave without giving me a single chance to respond. For 14 months of being slowly turned into someone I no longer recognized as the man I had married. I listened to all of it. And I told him the truth, that I heard him, that I believed him, but that I was not ready to just go back to the way things were. That too much had happened. That I needed time to figure out what I actually wanted, separate from the chaos of everything that had been done to us. He said he understood. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed him. James went to his mother's house the following Saturday. He told me afterward what happened, not all at once but in pieces over the days that followed, the way you tell someone something that hurt you to witness carefully, with pauses. He said he sat down across from her in the living room, the same living room where I had heard her on the phone that Tuesday night more than a year before, and he put the recordings on the table between them. He didn't say anything. He just pressed play. He said she listened to the first one with her face completely composed. And then somewhere in the second recording her composure started to crack, not because she was sorry, he told me, but because she realized he had heard it. That the thing she had always been so careful to keep hidden had been seen. She tried to explain. Of course she tried to explain. She said the recordings were taken out of context. She said I had manipulated the situation. She said she had only ever done what she felt she had to do to protect her son, to protect their family, and couldn't he see that? Couldn't he understand that everything she had ever done was because of how much she loved him? James told me he sat there and he listened to all of it, and then he stood up, and he said very quietly, "I know what you did to her when she was pregnant, Mom." He said she went completely white. He said he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He told her that he was done. That he loved her and that would never change, but that he could not be in her life right now, maybe not for a very long time, and that this was not a decision made in anger. It was a decision made because some things, once you see them clearly, cannot be unseen. He walked out of that house, and he did not go back. 6 months after James walked out of Linda's house, she was diagnosed with a degenerative condition that affected her mobility. Nothing sudden, nothing dramatic, just a slow, relentless narrowing of the life she had built around herself. She needed help with things she had always done alone. She needed someone to be there, but there was no one. The friends she had maintained over the years began to fall away once James was no longer around to be the social glue. Once there were no more family dinners and Sunday lunches to organize around. Her sister Donna had said what she needed to say and stepped back from the relationship. The carefully constructed world Linda had managed and controlled for decades began to quietly come apart at the edges. She called James twice. He answered both times because he is who he is, because the love doesn't disappear even when everything else does. But he did not go to her. He told her he hoped she was getting the help she needed. He told her he was sorry she was unwell. And then he said goodbye. I never called. I never visited. I never sent a message. Not because I wanted her to suffer, I want to be honest about that. I didn't sit somewhere savoring what was happening to her. But I also understood very clearly that there was nothing I owed this woman. Not my time, not my compassion, not my presence. She had spent over a year of my life trying to take everything from me. The least I could do for myself was refuse to give her anything more. The last I heard, she was in a care facility. Someone distantly connected to James's family mentioned it in passing. He nodded and said he was glad she was being looked after, and then we moved on to something else. That was it. That was all it deserved. I want to tell you something before I go because I think it matters. I never set out to destroy Linda. I know that might be hard to believe after everything I just told you, but it's the truth. I wasn't sitting in Ashley's apartment those 3 weeks planning her downfall. I was surviving. I was trying to figure out how to get my life back and make sure that what had been done to me could never be done to anyone else, at least not by her. The thing that saved me wasn't anger, although I had plenty of that. It was patience. It was the decision, made very early and held onto very tightly through some of the worst moments of my life, to document instead of react. To wait instead of explode. To trust that the truth, if I was careful enough and patient enough, would eventually find its own way into the light. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, if something I said tonight sounded familiar in a way that made your chest tighten, I need you to hear this. You are not crazy, you are not too sensitive, you are not imagining it. Trust what you know, document everything. Tell no one until the time is right, and wait for your moment because it will come, it always comes. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the next one. There is something nobody tells you about living with someone who is slowly trying to destroy you. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel like a thriller or a nightmare you can wake up from. It feels like being cold all the time, this low, constant chill that never fully goes away no matter how many layers you put on. I remember mornings in that house where I would lie in bed for just a few extra minutes before getting up, just to have a moment where nothing had happened yet. Where the day was still clean and Linda hadn't said anything and James hadn't looked at me in that new way, and I could just breathe without calculating what it meant. Those few minutes in the morning were the only ones that belonged entirely to me. Everything else required a kind of performance I hadn't known I was capable of. Every dinner, every conversation, every moment in a room with Linda demanded that I manage my face, manage my tone, manage the exact degree of warmth in my voice so that I seemed normal, not too warm, because that would seem fake, not too cold, because that would give her something to report back to James. I had to be perfectly, invisibly ordinary at all times, and I had to do it while carrying the weight of everything I knew and couldn't say. People talk about emotional labor like it's a concept, an idea you read about in articles. I lived it, I breathed it. I performed it every single day for 14 months, and the cost of that performance is something I don't think I have fully finished paying even now. There were moments where I almost broke. A Tuesday afternoon in January, when Linda made a comment about my handwriting on a grocery list, something so small, so absurdly insignificant, and I felt this wave of something rise up in me so fast and so hot that I had to leave the room and go stand in the bathroom with the fan on, and my hands pressed flat against the wall for 3 full minutes before I trusted myself to go back out there. Because I knew that if I broke, if I let even one moment of what I was actually feeling show, she would use it. She would turn it into evidence. She would hand it to James wrapped in concern, and he would look at me differently again. So I pressed my hands against that wall and I breathed and I went back out there and I said nothing. And then I wrote it down that night. The date, the time, the exact words she said, exactly how I responded, and exactly how she smiled when I walked back into the kitchen like nothing had happened. I wrote it all down and I closed the journal and I put it back where I kept it, and I told myself one more day. Just get through one more day. I want to be fair to James because I think fairness matters even when it's hard. James is not a bad person. I need you to understand that, because it would be easier if he were easier to explain, easier to be angry about, easier to make sense of. But the truth is more complicated than that, and I think you deserve the complicated version. James loved his mother the way children love parents who sacrifice for them, with a kind of guilt woven into it, a permanent sense of debt that can never quite be settled. Linda had raised him alone. She had given up things he knew about and probably things he didn't, and she had been careful over the course of his entire life to make sure he knew it. Not loudly. Not in a way that could be called manipulative if you described it to someone else. Just quietly, consistently, a reference here, a sigh there, a look that said I did everything for you and I would never ask for anything in return, which of course meant that he always felt like he should be giving her something in return. That is a very specific kind of trap. And Linda had built it so gradually over so many years that James had no idea he was inside it. I understood this before I married him. I thought I could work around it. I thought that love, our love, the real thing we had built together, would be enough to make him see clearly when it mattered. That was my mistake. Not a stupid one, not one I'm ashamed of, just a mistake. The kind you only understand fully in hindsight, when you're sitting in your friend's apartment at 2 in the morning going back through 14 months of moments, and finding the exact place where you should have known better. The James I had married was still in there the whole time. I saw him in flashes, in the moments Linda wasn't in the room, in the way he still reached for my hand sometimes without thinking about it, in the way he looked at me when something funny happened and forgot, just for a second, to be distant. He was still there. She hadn't taken him completely. She had just buried him under years of debt and guilt and carefully managed loyalty, and I had to wait for him to find his own way back to the surface. When he finally did, when he sat at Ashley's table and went through every page of that journal with his jaw tight and his eyes red, I watched him come back to himself in real time. And it was one of the most painful things I have ever witnessed, and also one of the most important. James and I are still figuring things out. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people who tell stories like this sometimes tie them up too neatly at the end, and I don't want to do that to you. We are not back to where we were. I don't know if we ever will be, and I have made my peace with that uncertainty in a way that I couldn't have imagined a year ago. What I know is that we are talking, really talking, the way we used to, and that something between us that had been buried under 14 months of damage is slowly, carefully being excavated. Some days it feels possible. Some days it feels like too much. Most days it feels like both at once. I see a therapist now. Twice a week, a woman named Dr. Holloway who has this way of asking questions that make you realize you already knew the answer, you just needed someone to ask it out loud. She has helped me understand things about what I went through that I couldn't have understood on my own, about why I stayed quiet as long as I did, about what it costs to perform normalcy under sustained pressure, about the specific kind of grief that comes from losing a pregnancy in circumstances you can never fully prove and never fully stop wondering about. That grief is its own thing, separate from everything else. I carry it differently now than I did in those first months, but I carry it still. I think I always will. What I don't carry anymore is the weight of Linda's opinion of me. That surprisingly, unexpectedly turned out to be the easiest thing to put down once I finally gave myself permission to put it down. I spent 14 months twisting myself into shapes trying to manage how she saw me, trying to be just palatable enough that she couldn't use me against myself. And the moment I walked out of that house with my bag and my evidence and my one-word answer, okay, I felt it lift. Just like that, like something I had been holding so long I had stopped noticing its weight was suddenly gone. I don't think about her much anymore. When I do, it is without heat, without anger, without even much sadness. Just a kind of clarity. She was who she was. She did what she did. And the life she was so determined to take from me is still mine. There was one specific night where I came closer than I ever came to breaking my own rule. It was a Friday in February, about 10 months into living in that house. James and I had actually had a good evening. Linda had gone to visit a friend, and it was just the two of us for dinner, and something about the absence of her, the way the air in that kitchen felt different when she wasn't in it, allowed us to just be ourselves for a few hours. We cooked together, we talked about nothing important, we laughed at something stupid on television, and for a little while it felt like before. Like the version of us that existed before that house and that woman and all of it. We were lying in bed that night, the lights off, and James reached over and took my hand in the dark the way he used to do in the beginning. And I lay there holding his hand and I thought, tell him. Just tell him everything. Tell him what you heard that first night, tell him what she says when he's not in the room, tell him about the teas and what you read about them, tell him you are frightened in a way you have never been frightened before. Just say it. He is right here, he is holding your hand. He loves you, tell him. I lay there for a long time holding his hand in the dark, and I thought about what would happen if I did. I ran through it in my mind, his face, his first reaction, the questions he would ask, the ones he wouldn't ask, the way Linda's voice would sound when he went to her with it, the expression on his face when she was done explaining. And I knew how it would end. Not because James was a bad man, not because he didn't love me, but because he wasn't ready yet. Because I had nothing but words and she had 30 years. So I held his hand and I said nothing. And a few minutes later his breathing slowed and he was asleep. And I lay there in the dark for another hour, staring at the ceiling, running through dates and incidents in my head like a list I was memorizing for an exam I couldn't afford to fail. I got up at 2 in the morning and I wrote for an hour in my journal. And then I went back to bed. That was the night I understood completely and without any remaining doubt that I was in this alone, and that the only way out was through. Sometimes I think about what I would say to Linda if I could say anything, if consequences didn't exist and the words could just go somewhere and land. I don't think I would say what most people might expect me to say. I don't think I would talk about what she did to my marriage or my pregnancy or my sense of self. I think I would ask her one question, just one. Was it worth it? Not rhetorically, not as an accusation. I would genuinely want to know. Because from the outside, from the place I'm standing now, looking back at all of it, I cannot find the version of events where any of this made sense for her. She had a son who adored her. She had a daughter-in-law who came into that house willing to love her. Genuinely willing, with no agenda and no ulterior motive and nothing but a real desire to belong to that family. She had everything she could have wanted if she had just let it be what it was. And she burned it down. Slowly, methodically, deliberately, she took everything that was good about that situation and she turned it into something unrecognizable. And for what? What did she end up with? A care facility and a phone that doesn't ring. I genuinely don't understand it. I have sat with therapists and friends and my own thoughts at 2 a.m. and I still don't understand it. Maybe that's okay. Maybe some things don't have an explanation that satisfies. Maybe the honest answer is just that some people are capable of things that others will never fully comprehend, and the only thing to do is make sure you are not in the room when they do them. I got out of the room, eventually. It took longer than it should have and it cost more than it should have, but I got out. And I am still here. Before I really go, I want to say one more thing. If you are in the middle of something like this right now, if you recognized yourself somewhere in this story, if something I described made you feel less alone in something you've been carrying, I want you to know that the isolation you feel is part of how it works. It is not an accident. The people who do what Linda did, who operate the way she operated, they rely on you feeling like no one would believe you. They rely on the gap between what you know and what you can prove. They rely on your patience running out before theirs does. Don't let it. Document everything. Write it down, date it, be specific. Save messages. Keep records. Find one person outside the situation, just one who you trust completely, and tell them what is happening even if you can't prove any of it yet. Not to ask them to act, just so that someone outside your own head knows the truth. That matters more than you think it does. And be patient with yourself. The version of you that is smiling at dinner and saying nothing and going upstairs and writing in a journal, that version of you is not weak. That version of you is doing something extraordinarily difficult. Don't mistake endurance for surrender. They are not the same thing. Your moment will come, maybe not the way you planned, maybe not on the timeline you hoped for. But truth has this quality to it, this stubborn, persistent, inconvenient quality where it tends to find its way out eventually. Linda's did. Give yours the time it needs. And in the meantime, you are not alone. You never were. Subscribe if this meant something to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And I'll see you in the next one.